All right, we'll get rolling
Last
here. Thanks for everyone for attending this panel. And it was really appropriate, I think, that our friends at Soccerex entitled this Mi Casa, Su Casa, because at the USL, when we're developing stadiums across the country, we call our stadiums the community living rooms. And I think our league is unique in the fact that we have such a large growth pipeline over the next 4 years where we're going to be building 30 plus stadiums. And so we think about stadiums every single day, and have really the pleasure of having 3 people that I work with on stadiums every day to share a number of different projects that we're working on. So first, Cindy Chipman is the president of our new expansion team in Spokane. Mark McCullers, his firm is who I work with. I think, Mark, are we working on 10, 12 projects at least for the league? And I think he's working another half dozen for some of our teams. And Mark's been a key for me in terms of how do we structure the stadiums, how do we finance the stadiums, and really how do we keep moving the ball along, because these are 1 to 4 year projects. And finally, Brett Johnson, who is someone that's one of our leaders among our ownership group. And I think there's just a panel on multi-club ownership, and Brett, with his ownership, and he started our Phoenix Rising Club, is the lead owner in our FC Tucson in League One, is the lead owner in our new expansion club in Rhode Island, the chairman of Ipswich, which his group recently purchased. And in addition to that, has had just a tremendous career in the private equity space. And so much of what we think about is financing. And so Brett's been great for me to help me think about, and our teams to think about creative finance solutions. So to kind of get things kicked off, wanted to start with Brett, when we look at stadiums, what we talk about a lot is the transformational impact that stadiums can have. So, with the multiple projects that I mentioned, and a couple that aren't announced yet, talk a little bit about what a stadium anchor project can mean to a community.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here, an honor, and thank you all for participating. I've had the pleasure of having a front row seat with the growth of USL for now close to 8 years, and it's been extraordinary to see the way the league has evolved. Is that my static? Sorry about that. I don't know if... Okay, hopefully I can continue talking, but long story short, after the success of Phoenix Rising, I started to think about other markets that would benefit specifically with the USL Championship club, and Rhode Island really stood out. It's the best demographics in the country without a professional soccer team, consistently the top media, in the top 10 for media ratings. And additionally, they lost their only prominent professional sports team, which was a AAA baseball team that picked up and moved to Massachusetts. So long story short, about 4 years ago, I responded to a very competitive RFP, which we ultimately won, and we're now building a $90 million USL Championship anchored stadium, but we will develop a lot of real estate around the stadium. We're going to create hundreds of millions of dollars of tax revenue for the state and for the city. We're going to create thousands of permanent jobs, and it will really transform the economic region, not just in the city, but for all of Rhode Island. It's the biggest project in the state of Rhode Island by some measure. But I think that's the ability that USL has to kind of come into markets and to put an anchor in the ground. And it feeds off the stadium, though. The key part of our project is we've got to get the team and stadium launched, and then we'll build everything around it. But I'm very proud of the difference that we're making in that area, and hopefully the example we're setting for a host of other markets that I think are following in a similar footsteps.
Great. And again, I think one of the opportunities and why this panel is relevant is that with the USL footprint, we have stadiums 5,000 to 15,000. And the growth in the market size, we can do these all across the country. It's not just the top 30 MSAs. And so, Mark, when we look at a market and we're thinking about sizing, can you talk about some of the elements where it's seats versus capacity and other elements that go into really finding that perfect size for a stadium?
Sure. Well, what we're finding across the country in markets that we're working in is that there actually is a need. There's a void for this 5,000 to 15,000 seat stadium product. A lot of smaller colleges and universities that need venues. As it relates to capacity, there's an opportunity to really fill the need of the community. But it's also important to think about the programming that you want to develop and that you want to produce. So, when you're thinking about U.S. national team games, men's or women's national team games, you need to have a configuration that is going to meet their requirements. And we can do that through design, we can do that through auxiliary seating, but it's really connecting with the community and the market need and what that use assessment looks like in order to create the design that's going to connect and really be successful and do what the project wants to do.
Thanks, Mark. Another huge discussion point that we have with our city, county, and in some cases state partners is the value that the stadium can bring to from a fan experience perspective, but more importantly for us is the residual benefit that can have to the surrounding bars, restaurants, hotels, to really make the experience of being, in most cases, downtown, just an elevated experience for the community. So, Cindy, we had a situation in Spokane where the city was facing kind of two choices and leaning heavily towards the outcome that we didn't think was optimal for the city. Can you walk our audience through what that decision was in Spokane and how we were able to convince the city to choose the alternative option?
Sure. Thank you again for inviting me here, and just a little bit of a level set. Spokane, home to Gonzaga, so want to make sure everybody understands how much we love sport in Spokane. So when we're looking at the business leaders, community leaders, and even USL, Spokane had been a market, I think, on your radar for a while. This opportunity that the school district and the bond measure was to renovate an existing stadium on the outskirts of town to serve 5 high schools, and not one of those high schools was actually near that stadium site. And so coming into town and understanding what that would look like if you moved that stadium to a more centralized location, and again, to your point of being able to have our businesses and our community actually benefit from a different location, was really important. And so to highlight not only accessibility, the centralized location, more accessible for students and families, more accessible for the community to come and enjoy and support our local high schools, because that's a big part of these stadiums. It's always a partnership, whether it's with whoever's funding it or your community. The other key piece was the economic impact. So being able to commission a study to talk about what that would look like, the economic impact of in an isolated area of town versus your downtown, and in Spokane, the impact was over $11.4 million to bring it downtown, which there was a synergy with other sports-related facilities. If you left that stadium and renovated it in an isolated location, it was about a $1.5 million impact. We're talking 10 times the economic impact to being able to have a centralized location and being a multiplier effect for businesses and other economic impact. So really providing that kind of no-brainer data was an important piece for us working with the local community and the school district.
Great. And Brett, we had a similar situation when you first started in Rhode Island. The city was really focused on backfilling the former minor league baseball stadium. Can you talk the audience through how you were able to convince them to take a different approach to the project?
Yeah, so McCoy Stadium was where the Paw Sox, the Pawtucket Red Sox, used to play, and when it was built I think it was built during the Great Depression, just to date the stadium, and it was 1.5 miles away from the highway. I'm sure when it was built in 1938 or whatever it was fantastic location. In 2020, it's a horrible location. And, but understandably, the city and state, candidly, they were looking at it and trying to figure out how do you fill this stadium. And for a host of different reasons, not only the location being bad, a big part of my thesis in terms of how I approach the financing, certainly the private financing, was leveraging a program called the Opportunity Zone program. And one of the benefits of that approach is McCoy was not in an opportunity zone. So that gave me some added leverage to say to him, look, that doesn't work for me. But ultimately, there was prime city-owned real estate along the river that wasn't an opportunity zone, and I was ultimately able to get the city and state to really focus on that. And the great news is they're now going to repurpose the McCoy Stadium to a unified high school. They're going to take 2 high schools, merge them, and build a new campus there. And I get to focus on kind of prime waterfront real estate that has the added benefits of the OZ program, has the added benefit where the stadium is going to be built was formerly a brownfield site that was owned by it's still owned by the power company. But I was able to structure a 100-year lease. They're going to remediate the entire site. But we're taking something that, if not for us, it would have been fenced, would have been cleaned up, fenced. No one would have been able to kind of be on it. And now we're going to kind of use the highest and best of creating a stadium, which will, for a lot of reasons, well beyond just the professional USL team and the women's team that we intend on launching. We'll have lacrosse, and we'll have rugby, and we'll have concerts, and really make it a community asset.
So again, common theme is we need to make the fan experience in venue, of course, is exciting as possible, but we also need to look at outside the stadium. And they're extremely related because the larger economic impact that we can do, which typically means the larger project, the more funding mechanisms we have to enhance the stadium experience for our supporters. So Mark, can you just kind of talk the audience through, and again, it is jurisdiction dependent, but some of the kind of tools in the toolbox that we use to have a more expensive stadium, but at the same time, it can be less expensive because of the funding mechanisms that we're able to deploy.
Sure. Well, as you talked about the ancillary development and the experience around the stadium, that also provides us, and the stadium is a catalyst, it's transformational, so it's contributing to that vertical execution on the development. It's critically important because that's what drives the incremental tax base. So a key tool we use across the country is tax increment financing. Typically that's property tax increment, so a stadium goes into an opportunity zone and helps get that development moving forward, and then the increase in that property value and those payments come back to reimburse the project for cost. Now, as Justin said, it does change across jurisdiction in terms of whether you can use sales tax. Hotel tax is another. Some jurisdictions have admissions tax. So there's several tools for tax increment financing in capturing those increased revenues from the project and funneling them back into the infrastructure or site acquisition, but importantly, if we can, to create the best possible stadium for the community and for the club.
Great. And another big part of our stadium strategy, of course, is the football being played in it. And it's critical in our view that one element that has been at the disadvantage of our amazing women athletes, and particularly women football and soccer players, is that they haven't had the venue quality to showcase their skills. And so if you take an NFL game and you take out the pomp and circumstance around their venue, it's a different game. And so a conversation that we've been having with our city, county, and state partners is, again, on a historic basis, almost all of support from public support for venues has been for men-only stadiums. And I think that's something that is, not acceptable now. And for us, that's been a big part of our, we think our value proposition to our partners is that we can bring professional men's and women's soccer to our cities. So Cindy, can you talk a little bit about in Spokane, when we announced the W team coming there, what was the city's reaction, the community's reaction to the prospect of having women's soccer being able to play under the lights on ESPN in Spokane?
I think it's not surprising that a community is very excited when they realize that they're going to have a high-end, elite, and professional women's soccer team to come support. What amazed me about Spokane was the media headlines and the questions asked by the press, and 70% of the questions I was asked had to do with the women's game. And I almost sometimes wanted to ask people like, you heard that we're bringing a men's professional team, right? But it was all about the women's game. And we saw that when with the announcement. And I think what was really fascinating to follow up on that is, to your point too, Justin, is when you're using public dollars especially, how important it is to provide and make sure that the community understands what you are going to provide and partner with, and those opportunities for women to play the sport in an equal facility as the men. And many communities have never had that. Many of the female sports have never had that type of option. Spokane is beyond excited to see it. And I think the other key piece of that really is the opportunity then to support it, but to watch and grow the pipeline for women in sport, and also for women to work in the front office. Because again, there's this, if I can see it, I can be it. And for women to see other women playing in a venue like that, also women working in the sport, coaching in the sport, it's kind of like a ripple effect. But I think that investment is key. And USL's partnership with communities, again, this community living room concept, it is a partnership, and this is a community's stadium.
So I think Cindy brought up a great point, and one that's applicable to everyone here is there's a select number of women who will be able to play on the field, and even for them, be able to stay in the game and in moving to the front office is so important. And so I know Cindy, you've made it a big focus with Spokane and the front office opportunity of sports, and particularly within the USL ecosystem, where we're adding 30 men's team, 30 to 50 women's team over the next 5 years. There's just a tremendous opportunity on the front office side, in addition, of course, to the playing opportunities. Brett, the next area I wanted to get your thoughts on were training grounds, right? So I think the stadiums are a critical component and get a lot of the attention, but now we're broadening our definition of real estate to, of course, include training grounds, which now are more than just fields. They can be large, tens and sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars projects. So can you talk a little bit about the opportunity within the training facility space?
Yeah, I feel long term, the stadium is the bright, shiny object. It's, the community's going to look at the stadium, and that's where they're going to get excited to, again, go and watch all these different venues, sports, et cetera, concerts. But I think the training ground, relative to anyone who's investing or interested in USL specifically, or sort of professional sports writ large, the training ground is probably the most important asset, because that's where the team, the coach, the players, the front office usually spends the majority of their time. And so in Rhode Island, we haven't announced it yet. We're still got some I's to dot and T's to cross, but we intend on building a world-class training facility that will be separate from the stadium. It will be in a separate city, not too far away. But I also think it just increases the overall impact that we're going to have on that state. Additionally, it provides what I would say is a platform, these players all have options in terms of where they can play. And I think over time, the arms race is really going to be is how much you're investing into the training facility, the quality and caliber of that. And I think that will likely make a difference between signing with one club versus another. And on a related note, we intend on, as we kind of approach all of this, is how do you make it a business? So as we look at the training center, a big investment is going to be a state-of-the-art athletic performance center, which will open up for all of Southern New England. So we intend and expect that we'll get all the university athletes, colleges. Rhode Island's got an incredibly dense collegiate population. So we expect that those best and brightest of those athletes are going to be coming to rehab and get some of the state-of-the-art attention that we're going to invest in that facility. But anyway, it's a long way of saying that increasingly, I think an ideal scenario is you obviously have a stadium and a training facility, and you can have one kind of master complex. It's very tough to find that kind of space in a good location. So increasingly, I think you're probably going to have to go with what Louisville has done, what we're doing in Rhode Island, is probably looking at two separate locations and try to figure out the synergy between the two.
And Brett, real quick, some news last week about the EB5 program. Can you just talk about, how there's an renewed opportunity now that that program is reauthorized for stadiums and training facilities?
Yeah, I mean, so EB5, for those of you that might not be familiar with it, it's a program where historically foreigners that invest specifically in projects in the United States at a certain level that creates a certain number of jobs, has an economic impact, they can get a visa. And Congress just restored that program. It had been dormant for a couple years, I think. But they've now restored it. And I am really bullish on the ability, in the most positive sense, to look at that project, the EB5 project, and find a great part of the capital stack, because at the end of the day, these endeavors are very expensive. Building a stadium, building a training facility, and if you can find any single way that you can approach it creatively, on the public side, on the private side, you have to figure out how to kind of leverage it. That's why the OZ program, Opportunity Zone program, is important. That's where I feel increasingly there's going to be an amazing opportunity to leverage the EB5 program with stadiums, with training facilities, and with these extended professional sports assets, because they do exactly that. They create a lot of jobs, they create a lot of economic activity, and I think where the programs historically, both EB5 or even Opportunity Zone, where they come in for some criticism is where they're going into areas that don't need the money and or they're not having the job creation. And I just know from all the stuff that we're collectively working on, there's going to be no risk of that. You could sit there and say, look how many people I've employed in the front office, look at how many other corporations that are supporting my professional team. So hopefully it'll be a good marriage, but I look forward to seeing that program become a really valuable contributor.
And for those of you that have worked on a stadium or plan to work on a stadium, definitely one key element is that they do take time. And it's not just a question of money or just a question of identifying the land. It really does take a community effort to come together to get it over the line. Cindy, can you talk about the years of work, and especially for most of Spokane during COVID, the kind of grassroots nature of the coalition that we had to build to get the project finally over the line?
I think one of the key pieces too is that vision. And so I'm really grateful from a community member in Spokane that USL came in and had that vision to present to us of what it could look like. And then what was really special is, again, in the midst of COVID and a shutdown at the time, I was running task forces for our city and our county, but business leaders came together and said, what is it that we could do together? If USL has this vision, could this be that thing that once this is on its way out, that really could revitalize our community? And it was a resounding yes. And then it was, what can we do together to get this over the finish line? And it was identifying the information needed, the economic impact studies, parking studies. But I really think it was a true partnership in the beginning of that partnership, where it was creating the vision, understanding what needed to happen. It's a multi-year commitment. But Spokane is going to be a huge beneficiary of it, and our community is really grateful for it. The business leaders were a huge part of that, committing some funding for those studies and really being champions of that vision too, because you need the local ground support for them to take it through those tough times when it seems that the project isn't going to take full flight, that you've got people on the ground that are willing to dig in and deep and get it going.
One of my favorite memories of Spokane was, this was late June, July, so kind of the height of the pandemic, the most uncertainty, certainly economic uncertainty, health uncertainty, and despite all of that, we had a conference call with 60, 70 community business owners, again, who were facing significant uncertainty, not to mention the health, very scary time for general health, but they were on the phone call to talk about how can we bring this stadium to Spokane. It's just one of those projects that, and we're lucky enough to work in the industry. My previous job, built shopping centers, and we never had that for building a Walmart, I can tell you. And it's just the nature of sports. This is a community asset. It is a community living room. And if we do it the right way, we can really get this public buy-in. Mark, as we kind of come to the end here, another thing that we've been really proud of is to look at the number of different types of stadiums that we can build, whether they be golf courses or repurposed dog tracks, and really kind of reimagine space. So can you talk a little bit about how we try to do that across the country?
Sure. I think ultimately, look, we're trying to create a destination. We're trying to create a space for a certain type of experience, really targeted towards the USL and soccer's core demographic, and that's millennials, Gen Z, young professionals. So that's the the purpose of the different types of stadiums that can be constructed and try to create that specific sort of experience in particular for that demographic. I'm sorry, can you repeat the question again?
It's just about kind of reimagining space, right? So in some markets we have just vacant land, right? Yeah. That's downtown, and we can put a stadium on it. A lot of times we have to get more creative, right? And I think looking at space and how to reimagine it, and every stadium is not the same, right? So how we try to do that.
So you can create that experience in a lot of different ways. Is where I was heading before I lost track of my thought. There's projects that we're looking at on state county parkland. Okay, so it's a situation where there's not as much ancillary development potential available, but we can create this tremendous event machine at this location, and it has all the attributes to, again, create that experience and create that destination, that sense of this is the place to be. Certainly urban core stadiums do that. That's really ideal. They can be challenging and can be expensive. In another market, we are looking at a golf course renovation. Public golf courses are tough business right now. So communities are looking at ways to take underperforming land and underperforming assets and put them to work. And our projects can certainly help do that. So there's a lot of ways to get it done and to create that destination feel.
And the project that Mark mentioned about the fairground, again, really looking at the surrounding area. In that particular market, there isn't an open air concert venue. And so in that one, we're trying to design having a permanent stage behind one of the goals, because since there is no concert music venue, we think that we can bring, as from just a programming perspective, a higher amount of concerts and music to there. Also, because in that case, we have 60, 70 acres, we're really thinking about it as a plaza that we can bring in events week in and week out too. So guys, in the last couple of minutes we have, any just closing thoughts for the audience here about how to make the stadium be more part of a community?
I think the first key thing is to listen to know your community. For us in Spokane, and every community may be a little different, but for us, it really was a commitment to the women's game. It was important to our community, and that was part of what we were able to bring in our package. And also the partnership and the availability of financing this together with the school district, and what that long-term partnership will look like for this community, and the ability for USL to help with the funding in the stadium, to provide assets and things that will stay there, that students, when we're not running a USL event, the students with the high schools are able to enjoy a higher level of broadcast capability, a video scoreboard, a type of venue that they would not be playing in had it not been for the partnership and that ability to come into our community. So I think a few key takeaways is know your community, understand who your financing partners are and what's important to them, and what you can leave as a legacy for your community by being able to come together and really elevate the fan experience and the community living room effect of what that facility will do.
Okay, Mark?
Yeah, I think the best advice I could give is be very thoughtful and form these relationships with the community leaders. I mean, you've got to have their support. So it has to be a team effort, and you have to approach it that way. That sort of relationship is going to allow the group to figure out how to get it done, okay? There's not a cookie-cutter approach to this, a one-size-fits-all. Each market is different, and you need creative problem solving. So, as Cindy said, thinking about how you connect with your community, and that should be what your team is doing as well. Your stadium should be doing the same thing. What resonates? And Justin used the term value proposition. It's critically important. There's economic value, but there's also qualitative value, quality of life, national and international exposure. There's a lot of things that a project like this can bring. And so communication and collaboration with your leadership in the community is key.
Brett?
Yeah, I mean, I think back with Phoenix, we built a modular stadium in 51 days, which completely transformed the trajectory of that franchise. And that was all 100% privately financed from our ownership group. And on a relative basis, it wasn't that expensive a proposition. And certainly in terms of return on investment, return on the equity increase for the overall enterprise, it's been overwhelming. So, the point is, there are ways to approach in your markets, if you will. You don't need to build what I'm doing right now in Rhode Island, which is a $90 million stadium right out of the gate. You can start with a rounding error of that investment, and you can start to transform the community and really start to build a much greater sense of buy-in and then grow from there. So I think the opportunities are extraordinary. I give all credit to USL because it has a footprint between championship and League One, between the Super League and the W League and League Two. I mean, it has so many different options that community can look at and start to at least plant a flag around any one of those and then start to build from there. So I really believe it's going to be transformative looking forward in the next 5 to 10 years. The amount of facilities that USL is going to be responsible for seeing built, everything from a 5,000 all the way up to 15,000, that's going to be transformative to the sports and entertainment landscape of America. I mean, right now, what I've become aware of, and I'll just kind of focus on Rhode Island, is in the Rhode Island market, you either have a ton of colleges or university or high schools that have like 2,000 seat facilities, they can't serve alcohol in them, or you have Gillette Stadium where it's 72,000 at Gillette, I think. And with the utmost respect, that's other than the Patriots and Beyonce, not too many people are going to be selling out 72,000. So it doesn't make for the ideal scenario. And I mean it respectfully, just a long way of my saying that 10,000 seat stadiums on average in great locations are going to be really in high demand and going to start to transform a Spokane, a Rhode Island, Cleveland, et cetera, go on and on, Buffalo.
So just to close out, I think, everyone at this conference is obviously, a big supporter of our sport. And what's been really exciting for us at the USL and for others is that when we look at where our sport is, we look back at 1994, kind of really kicked off professional soccer in the United States. we had basically 0 professional soccer-specific stadiums. Come 2026, it's just going to be amazing. We'll have 70 to 80 across the USL. The MLS will have 30 to 32. The NWSL will have several. And what we hear from our city, county, and state partners is very different narrative than I think everyone probably heard 10 plus years ago. Now it's, what can we do to bring soccer to our community? Because our businesses are demanding it, because they want to attract talent. And for them to attract talent, one thing that they want is professional sports and professional soccer in particular. And having this community asset where they can go for a family-friendly price, for affordable price, is very important. Put on top of that the transformational development that we can bring to our city, county, and states. It's just so exciting to see the growth of the game that we all love so much. So before we wrap up, I'd love to answer any questions about this. Yes?
Can you hear me? Yeah.
A little bit, yep.
So you guys talked about building all these stadiums and giving back to the community and everything around it, but you haven't touched on sustainability aspect of it. So there's a lot of construction, it's a lot of carbon footprint. So how do you guys take that into consideration in terms of CSR/conscious environmental mentality?
Yeah. But it's a great point, and something that we do think a lot about, because as a fan base, soccer, we are younger, generally very progressive, so it's very important for our fans. Every project is a little bit different, but like in Spokane, we're talking with, they happen to have a couple large cross-laminated timber companies based there, and so a big part of our early dialogue was, how can we, since we are doing so many stadiums, and because of the size, I think we will have opportunities to test out different materials. So that's a critical point, something that we're trying to figure out, how can we replicate and make it scalable to be able to do these facilities, not only for our stadiums, but also for our training facilities. But we have to look at the whole picture, right? So Cindy did mention that in Spokane, rather than build 8 stadiums, small stadiums, we are creating one venue that everyone can use. So it's exactly to your point, how can we be more sustainable in the construction materials? But it's also the journey, right? So having it downtown where people now are living so they can walk there, and having the use of the stadium be used for more than just men's soccer or women's soccer, or high school concerts. We don't need to build multiple venues that aren't being used more days than they are being used.
So Justin, if I could just add, there's also a funding tool that's relevant to this topic called PACE. It's publicly assessed clean energy. And it actually allows a financing mechanism that's attractive for owners because it sits off balance sheet. But and we're looking to get as much as 20% of the project funded through PACE funding. So LED lighting and efficient water usage and things of that nature. If you invest in that infrastructure in the project, then you qualify for this program. It's a little bit better cost of money usually, but that's also another tool.
And it's important, Mark, because again, what we also have to think about is the total cost, right? Which includes environmental impact, but even the things like CLT and other construction materials, they can have a higher upfront cost, but have a lower total cost of ownership, over the period of time, and in many cases can last longer. Any final questions before we wrap up? Awesome. Well, thank you all so much, and thanks to our panelists for being here today.
Thank you.